All right, and with that, we will get started. So this is Accessible and Inclusive Library Experiences, led by Troy Hurteau, who is the Business and Technology Applications Analyst at NC State University Libraries, as part of the Digital Learning Initiatives Department, Library Initiatives Department. And he sits on both the Accessibility Committee in the libraries as well as the EDI Committee. I've had the pleasure of being on the EDI committee for the last year or so now with Troy, and he's really just such a delight to work with, always sharing fantastic ideas, and really having our library community engaged around accessibility and inclusion. And so with that, I will have Troy take it away.
Thank you, Devin. And thanks to NC Live for hosting the DEIA Learning Series. Hi, my name is Troy Hurteau, and I'm a software developer in the NC State University Library Digital Libraries Initiatives Department. I apologize for the audio today. We had a little bit of a emergency at the library that I work in, so I had to do a last minute, hop into a different place. And what else I was going to say about that? Yeah. Captions should be available for this session, and I will try to make sure that all text from the slides is included and describe any of the images presented. I'm a light-skinned white male wearing glasses and shaved bald head with a brown graying mustache and stubble. Today I'm wearing a black polo and some enamel pins on the lapels and a large audio headset. In the background, it is a impressed concrete wall. We had, like I said, the last minute change of venue, so ignore what the slides say as far as physical description for location. Before we get started, here are some considerations to help us ground the session today. Is it being recorded and will be available for view or review later? I may use language that is culturally specific to the groups I work with, but recognize we're in a situation where terms like diversity and inclusion are under attack. In some communities, if you need or prefer to use different language, we can make it work. Let's see. Yeah, I'm sorry, I was forgetting to announce changing slides. We're on the right one, I believe. We'll focus on making progress with accessibility rather than approaching it as a one-time effort. It's ongoing work, and there's room for everyone to learn and contribute. I hope to use this presentation to model a container for the conversation that follows so that we can talk about successes and challenges, even failures, with accessibility efforts without letting shame get in the way of making progress. Next slide, please. A brief overview of what we'll be talking about. I'll start with my background in accessibility and the transition from being very focused on digital accessibility to also learning more about physical accessibility. We'll look at disability and accessibility in terms of not just getting better with compliance, but committing to becoming more inclusive. That will include accessibility for physical spaces, navigating the library, hosting events, and providing services. There will be some real-world examples, a couple of quizzes sprinkled throughout, and there should be plenty of time for discussion afterwards. For a large part of my career as a software developer for the university, the focus on accessibility was through the lens of web accessibility. I knew about considerations like mobility, cognitive challenges, and interpersonal communication. We all have a lot of things competing for our time and attention. Unless disability or accessibility is directly related to what's happening right now, many people have the privilege of not needing to think about it. I became accustomed to keeping accessibility in mind for the narrowly focused task of making things for the web, but that doesn't always translate to other areas. Working on projects where the digital web overlaps with the physical world gave me more opportunities to learn about many different aspects of disability. This slide includes a picture of the Innovation Studio at DH Hill Junior Library. It features 4 white tables, a large white column in the middle of the room, and glass walls into adjacent spaces. On the table in the foreground, images are projected onto the surface. A variety of devices hang from the open ceiling, projectors, cameras, and sound application dome. Next slide, please. We're living in a time where digital access is increasingly the primary means of access, and from the perspective of getting better at digital accessibility is important. Our digital information and services open faster and more convenient gateways for many people, but when they are inaccessible, that means we are excluding a lot more people. Digital access can also be a gatekeeper that blocks people. Compared to some aspects of our institution, like the buildings that we're in, I tend to think of digital technology as being more malleable. It can be quicker and cheaper to change, meaning that we can often address access barriers more easily. As the focus on the digital continues to increase, we need to keep the socioeconomic barriers of technology in mind too. This is not just a separate concern from disability, but also an intersectional concern. Many people are impacted by disability are also impacted financially. I do want everyone to leave here today with ideas they can jump in and put to use to improve accessibility, but I'll also introduce some general frameworks that support the examples we talk about here today. We can't always just copy what works in one place and replicate it in another. Accessibility isn't just compliance, but compliance is often a good place to start because some people do just want a checklist of things they need to do. You won't get the best results working this way, but you can get consistent results. Other people are up for the challenge of getting curious, making connection to others, and having generative dialogues. Just like other forms of allyship, these efforts work better when we're grounded in understanding. No matter how you split your focus between compliance and inclusion, both approaches require continuous learning. You don't want to just plan and act, but also assess the outcome so you can adjust your approach. I'm fortunate to work in an institution. Oh, sorry, next slide. One more, please. We're getting a little bit out of sync. I keep forgetting to announce. I'm fortunate to work in an organization that does try to be inclusive and considers accessibility a cultural value. This year, the NC State University Libraries participated in a consultation with other Triangle Research Library Network institutions on the accessibility of our exhibits programs. Among the many great insights from the report provided by Prime Access Consulting was the recommendation for engaging in inclusive design. The firm is run by an NC State alum that I've had the privilege of working with in the past. This slide includes a link to a great podcast with Sina, where he gets to the core of what inclusive design is about. There's a QR code in the top right corner of the slide. The name of the podcast episode is Behind the Glass with Sina Baram from the Matters of Experience podcast. You may have heard about universal design before, so in this presentation and discussion, we'll be touched on both approaches, universal design and inclusive design, and how they relate to accessibility. One thing to expect when working to change your organization for more accessibility and inclusion is that the things that you are working to improve are sometimes designed intentionally by people with vested interests and using established processes. You may meet resistance when things function as intended, even when they were not designed with everyone's needs in mind. Next slide, please. I mentioned that digital technology is one gateway to your library, but another important gateway is transportation. A lot of people take for granted the logistics of getting to their destination and whether they will be able to get what they need when they arrive. People with some disabilities have to invest a lot more time and effort in planning the logistics of transportation to reduce their overall effort. It may even be critical for their safety. Making sure your information is up to date, findable, and accessible is one step in being more inclusive. While it's important to provide this information on your own websites, take a moment to think about your own planning behavior. A lot of people use third-party platforms like Google Maps, so make sure the directions they provide will get people to places that include accessible parking and have accessible routes into the building. Next slide, please. Ooh, something happened here. There we go. Sorry, I guess that, can you go back a slide and go back one, see if that's the problem? Oh no. Well, fix something. So the title for this is supposed to be Blessed Laid Plans. There's no other text on the slide. In an earlier version of this presentation, I had a picture of the public library from the small town I grew up in. While looking it up in Google Maps, it really struck me that it looked frozen in time. Over 20 years later, from the outside, nothing has changed. This slide includes a picture of D.H. Hill Library from around sunrise. It's a tall brick building, trees in the foreground, and a fence with a sign that says Accessible Path Detour. In Raleigh and on the campus where I work, there is constant construction disruption to vehicle and foot traffic. Buildings come up and get demolished so frequently here. When the accessibility consultant came to campus, we found out that large construction projects that had been recently started meant that we need to be paying more attention to the impacts. There were solutions already in place, but not well connected. There was an effort put into compliance, but not enough planning on how each piece came together. We had directions to accessible parking. Signs related to construction detours were up, but they were located with people already familiar with pre-construction paths in mind. Accessible paths were labeled primarily for the public entrance and not the staff entrance we also often use for visitors. None of this was clear, so it led to some unnecessary confusion. Next slide, please. Before we really dive deep, let's take a quick break and do something a little more interactive. Please take a moment to reflect and think about which of these options is a better way to make sure that your spaces are both more accessible and more inclusive. Depending on how you think about these answers, it's perfectly understandable you might arrive at a different conclusion than the one that I would pick. They each have pros and cons, but I tend to like one better than the others. These options are have separate areas or sections to accommodate different needs at service points. For example, one section of a service desk being at a lower height. Another option, have a variety of furniture that can be rearranged to meet different needs. For example, some chairs with arms and some chairs without arms. Or would it be, make sure all access to a resource is handled one way consistently with no exceptions? We'll take about a minute to let people enter an answer and have some time to talk about the results.
I'm going to give about 15 more seconds for the poll.
What do we have, Devin? Well, I definitely agree with this. These are great results. The answer I tend to agree with most is variety of furniture, assuming that the variety meets different access needs and we're also being adaptable. That has a lot of potential to feel inclusive. My concern with the first answer is that while it is an accessibility feature, how inclusive is this going to feel? Is that lower section the one that gets staffed by default, or the one that only gets staffed when someone needs it? Is it in the middle? Is it at the end? And then for the last answer, it is good to be consistent. That can feel more inclusive sometimes, but if we're not adaptable in how we do things, it's likely we're going to eventually run into some kind of access barrier. And if we're not prepared to be adaptable, then that can put a delay in a lot of things. Next slide, please. Normally, I like to think about navigating the library. Normally, I think about the library, navigating the library as a solitary activity. When it comes to group needs, though, do we prioritize the majority or what's most inclusive for everybody? One of the things I hadn't really thought about when it came to mobility and things functioning as intended is elevators and stairs. We need both for different reasons, but I hadn't thought about the relevance of stairs and elevators being co-located. The report mentioned a couple of related things that really stood out. It feels more inclusive when people in groups don't have to split up because of different access needs. It's also better when you can make the recommended path the accessible path. Understanding the distance, time, and relative effort to get between different waypoints is an important part of planning. That includes connecting people to the right resources, so knowing where accessible bathrooms are and prioritizing the use of spaces with access to them is one consideration. For mobility, just being able to navigate horizontally isn't the only concern. Mobility is vertical too, so pay attention to sight lines and reach. Next slide, please. Let's see how this slide did. Okay, something's not working quite right. So this slide is supposed to have a title. Order, send to back. Heights. One project I've been involved in is book displays for History and Heritage Month celebrations. Originally, the signage of these displays was arranged perpendicular to the table, like in this picture. This slide includes an image of a reading area with waist height shelf adorned with books and signage for a display. A variety of seating and full height shelves are in the background. It appears dark outside the windows. There wasn't any documentation for the process of setting these up, so aesthetically it was really up to whoever took the time to do it. At some point, we switched to affixing the signage that described each book being flat to the table surface. When we were preparing the display for Disability Pride over the summer, a quick discussion helped us catch an accessibility issue. Based on the table height, the sight lines for the book descriptions assumed too much height, so they were hard to read if you were not standing standing. The way that they were originally set up was more accessible, so we made sure to correct the arrangement, and we documented and discussed it for the team so that when they prepared displays in the future, it was perpendicular. Next slide, please. Beyond the three-dimensional considerations of our spaces, details involving senses are important too. This isn't just about disabilities related to sensory impairment, but also differences in how sensory characteristics can impact cognition and focus. All spaces have sensory considerations such as light levels, noise, textural surfaces, and temperature. These can be useful intentional features. They could alternatively be unintended side effects, what we refer to in software development as bugs. Sensory features can be landmarks for navigation or make a particular space a desirable destination. They can also make the space itself a barrier to people for certain activities. Being prepared to accommodate the accessibility needs you might encounter involves a couple of considerations. Can we specialize spaces for dedicated use, or can we make the spaces adaptable to needs? Another sensory consideration, distance can matter. People may need to get close to see something, or they may even need to touch it. So this slide also should have a title. Oh, sorry, next slide, please. This title should have a slide, Sensory Maps. One of the recently popular projects in the State University libraries is our sensory-friendly maps. These highlight areas at our two main libraries based on sensory features like sound, lighting, and how busy they are. This slide includes an image of a reading area with white tables and chairs, lots of natural lighting from full wall windows looking out to a roof garden and trees in the distance. Superimposed is a sample map of the 5th floor James B. Hunt Jr. Library. Quiet and silent areas are highlighted in purple. There is still a lot of work that can be done in this area. Feedback from the exhibit accessibility report highlighted a lot of ways we can get better at supporting tactile information needs, and the sensory maps are a good example of this, since conveying the spatial nature of the information in text would be challenging. During a recent accessibility virtual water cooler chat with other libraries, we talked a bit about the challenges of enforcing sensory characteristics of spaces. It can be harder for remote, lightly supervised areas that are supposed to be quiet areas, food, or smell-free. At NC State, we also have a device lending program that includes sensory stimulation objects. Next slide, please. So, 1 second. Thank you. When it comes to letting people know what you have and how to access it, wayfinding for your spaces and discovery for your other resources have a lot in common. Tools like the sensory maps create a discovery layer for access needs you can accommodate. With many discovery tools, we include information that helps people determine if a resource is right for them. Including accessibility features is another way to be more inclusive. For example, our reservation system used for study rooms. We used to list rooms as accessible if they included adjustable height tables, which we knew worked better with mobility devices. But accessibility and disability are not just one thing, so being accurate helps. All or virtually all of our study spaces are compliant, just some have features that are better for some people than others. We switched to listing rooms by specific features, such as the adjustable height tables. It's not like accessible parking that is reserved, so being accurate and specific avoids confusion for everybody. Next slide, please. However you choose to expose the information, auditing your resources for accessibility can help you better understand who you might be unintentionally excluding. With that information in hand, you can be better equipped to decide where you'll prioritize accessibility efforts. You don't always have to replace a resource or reconfigure a space to remove barriers. You do want to think critically about how you adapt things so they can be inclusive as possible. In my organization, we have a variety of devices that are either available for anyone for lending and can be used for accommodation, learning about accessibility, or some of both. We have some devices that are not available for lending, but on hand to provide accommodation, especially for events. In both cases, letting staff and your patrons know about them helps keep it inclusive. Next slide, please. So this one should have a title, and the title is Readability Widget. One example of adapting a resource to improve accessibility is the experimental readability widget on our library website. Now, to be clear, we do not use this tool to make the website WCAG compliant. Our web team works with tools like PopeTech to scan our site for accessibility issues and fixes them using standard methods like adding alt text to images, having proper tags, and so forth. This slide includes a screenshot of our website with the Readability Web widget open and the dyslexic-friendly font selected. There's a large image taking up most of the screen with 3 students looking at the LGBTQ+ History Month exhibit in the Simon Rubin Visualization Gallery. The exhibit has many colorful panels of text and a rainbow and space motif. Other text, including the search box for library resources, is presented in the open dyslexic font. What the Readability widget does is it gives people an easy way to apply customizations to our web pages that their browser might not. The widget isn't a browser plugin, so they don't have to install it to use it. They don't have to install anything to use it. It's just a tiny JavaScript on our website. Most browsers have the ability to increase font size, and that's one important accessibility feature. The widget adds other things like switching everything to a dyslexic-friendly font or making the tint of the page warmer to reduce eye strain. Next slide, please. When we're thinking about how to make something accessible, we want to keep inclusion in mind. Just being WCAG compliant and having a building that met basic ADA requirements at the time it was built isn't going to make your library functionally accessible or inclusive for everybody. We're all required to make reasonable accommodation when requested. How we approach that conversation goes a long way to being more inclusive. The less an accommodation feels like an afterthought, the better. It seems obvious we want to deliver quality experiences. It also makes sense that when we can do things one way and best serve as many people as possible, that's efficient. This is where universal design practices come in. Universal design has tools to address adaptability built in, affordances like redundancy. What can go wrong, however, is that like any design process, universal design relies on collecting the right information to make decisions. We have to remain open to adapting by making accommodations when we fall short. Just sitting back and waiting for accommodation requests to come in before we figure out how to handle them isn't inclusive either. We should be prepared to make anticipated accommodations in a timely manner and with consistent quality. Also, having established parameters to navigate unexpected accommodation requests takes inclusion to another step forward. Next slide, please. We won't have time to get too deep into the details of universal design today, but I will link to a couple of great discussions related to it. In Redesigning for Cognitive Ease, Alyssa Panetta illustrates universal design principles with the suggestion, say it 2 ways, say it and show it. There's a QR code in the top right corner of the slide. The slide also includes a picture of 2 people, a presenter and an ASL interpreter. Beside the text, WCAG 2.0A, meaning single level A compliance. Using universal design, we aim to have one result that can be adapted by the learner to match how they best interact with information. The redundancy can reinforce key information and provide multiple pathways. Next slide, please. Okay, let's take another quick break for an interactive question. Again, I don't view this as a one right answer exercise. One tends to be more correct, but depending on how you think about it, the others also make sense. Which of the following behaviors would you avoid and discourage in your organization? Would it be talking openly about accessibility barriers and shortcomings in compliance? Would it be asking people if they have a disability? Would it be referring people to a designated disability service resource to get accommodations? I'll take about a minute to let people answer and have some time to talk about the results. Oh, I guess we didn't really talk about the results. We can do that after the presentation. Should have grabbed a water. We're good to move on, Devin, and go to answers.
Yep, we can.
Thank you. Okay. Where are we at here? So the answer I would choose, and I think that was the most popular answer, is asking people if they have a disability. There are a lot of problems with this approach. We do want to make it comfortable for people to share their access needs so we can meet them. But it's also almost never appropriate to ask people to disclose their disability. We should also be careful about assuming a person's disabilities. I can see challenges about talking openly about accessibility barriers in some organizational cultures. How you talk about your barriers with the public is one thing, but within the organization, honest communication is important. I also think we should be informed about what services are available and be prepared to help connect people to things that would be beneficial. That being said, we don't want to only refer people to other services as the primary means of accommodation. I like to balance three things. What can we do? What's going to best serve the person? And what can we improve at? Okay, next slide, please. When it comes to events, having the right culture for accessibility helps in being more consistently inclusive. This means equipping staff with both the knowledge and capacity to respond to accommodation requests. NC State University has a standard event registration system used across campus. All events automatically collect contact information and generate communication to let attendees know about the option for accommodation. Whether it's automated or just a norm, including that information for events is a good first step. It also helps to acclimate other attendees into the culture. That can be accomplished by sharing a code of conduct or even simple reminders at the start of a session. One example of this is use the mic. A gentle reminder why it is important for everyone to use the microphone when provided helps get more people on board. When designing to make things accessible, you want to focus on making it as equivalent as possible. In-person events have certain interactional qualities that can't be replicated online. So just offering online with captions for a live event isn't an equivalent accommodation. That being said, from an inclusive perspective, if someone's preferred accommodation is online access, being able to provide that is the right way to meet their access needs when you're able to. Be upfront about your limitations for quality for any accommodation if you have doubts, and then let people decide for themselves. Next slide, please. As it happens, we had just started looking at inclusive design a few months before the TRLN Exhibit Accessibility Project started. I think this presentation, Beyond Universal Design and Learning with Amanda Roth and Dominique Turnbow, was the first time I specifically recall inclusive design being mentioned as an approach to applying diversity, equity, and inclusion lens to universal design. This slide includes an infographic about universal design for learning with 3 approaches mapped to regions of the brain. Provide multiple means of engagement associated with a hollow circular region inside the middle of the brain. Provide multiple means of representation associated with the outer back half of the brain, and provide multiple means of action and expression associated with the outer front half of the brain. There's a QR code in the top corner of the slide. One thing I've noticed to watch out for in some of the literature online is falling into the trap of false dichotomies. Universal design does not ignore or preclude inclusion, but there are ways in which it can fail to specifically address it when inclusion is not a cultural value. Similarly, accessibility isn't only about compliance, and inclusive design isn't just about asking people what they prefer and then adding it to an ever-growing list, a buffet of options. It's helping you identify the right questions and making sure you're asking the right people. I think the lens of inclusive design is especially useful for thinking about our services. Understanding your organization's service point culture is one place to start. Next slide, please. It's easy to take for granted how many things are cultural. At a recent meeting with other campus project managers, I was reminded that even things like how we think about deadlines can vary from group to group. In some cases, deadlines are critically firm. Other groups treat them like squishy reminders and won't hesitate to move them around, at least some designs, around on a whim. Everyone in your organization should be clear on your accessibility culture, but making sure your public-facing staff have an awareness of access needs the library can meet and the resources and services you can refer people to is a high priority. Equipping people to know how to talk about accessibility and disability is critical. Disability is not a bad word, but how you talk about it makes a huge difference. There's a lot of stigma associated with this disability. While you should avoid making assumptions, it is important not to ignore it. Focus on access needs, and if people want to talk about their own disability, listen with curiosity and respond with empathy. To reiterate our earlier point, do not ask people to disclose disability. Also treat information about access needs as confidential. Next slide, please. Just like I like to view digital technology as being more malleable than the buildings that we're in, I also like to think of organizational cultures as malleable, at least when they are healthy. Having structures like a committee in place to help communicate across the organization and cultivating the psychological safety to manage up and advocate for inclusion issues makes these efforts possible. Having the cultural capacity and curiosity to do inclusion well relies on staff having training. Depending on your political situation, required training may need to be strictly compliance-based. Another important layer to these opportunities to engage, another important layer to this is opportunities to engage in activities to expand culture capacity, which again, based on your situation, may need to be strictly optional. Even so, they should be considered paid labor and like other forms of professional development. Also, just like mental health first aid and other listening intensive work, people can't apply this kind of training when they are stressed out and burned out. While these opportunities should be incremental, ongoing parts of professional development, it's especially good to begin focusing on this during onboarding for new employees because you're going to get a very diverse range of experience coming from different employers. Signal that accessibility is a cultural value early. Okay, we have one more slide that I need to find the title for. Yeah, thank you for advancing it. This one should have a title, Engaging the Community. A lot of the examples shared today are projects from our library's user experience team. In addition to being one of the departments that collaborates heavily in our service point operations, the user experience team engages our community regularly with user research. This slide includes a picture of students checking out one of our tiny cafes. A man with dark hair, beard, and glasses holding a clipboard is smiling, standing in front of a tiny cafe sign. Two students with long hair wearing winter clothes face a table at the NC State with the NC State University Library's logo. A woman with dark hair and glasses seated behind the table is talking with them. So the user research we do ranges from public-facing tiny cafes and other events to consultation with experts in our community. We're fortunate to have a budget for this. For the casual drop-in opportunities like the tiny cafe, food and beverages are typical. But it's important to compensate people, especially our students, for the time they provide in the more focused feedback. We also pay people commensurate to expert factors, and we include lived experience in that category. So a lot of our user research involves accessibility is paid as expert level. Next slide, please. One final reference before we open up for discussion. Another great presentation on accessibility and inclusion this year was Dr. Lydia Tang's Reimagining a More Accessible Future at Code for Lib. There's a QR code in the top right corner of the slide. In it, I believe her slide was titled Patterns of Inaccessibility. But here I've summarized and paraphrased a few things she talked about throughout the presentation, as well to think about what are the patterns of exclusion. We exclude when we assume everyone has the same uniform abilities, when we lack flexibility in letting people accomplish equivalent outcomes in different ways, when we treat accessibility as an afterthought, optional, or special, when we treat accessibility as an expert topic and someone else's responsibility, and when we do this, we exclude or recuse ourselves to the detriment of others. And we also exclude when we take an us versus them stance by acting like disability has nothing to do with us, hasn't already touched our lives or the lives of people we care about, and it won't eventually impact us. Next slide, please. Well, thank you all for being here today, and I'm hoping it opens up conversation. So we talk about other projects, challenges in accessibility and inclusion, and just questions you have.
Thank you so much, Troy. I know it's not easy to present in a stairwell.
The
We
best I
have
could
one.
do.
Yeah, no, we have one question from Robin asking, can you provide an example of when something would be accurate for some people, but not for others?
So again, like going back to the example of our room reservation system, just calling something accessible doesn't always, it conveys that it's for a specific group of people. And so by just listing features, that's opening it up. It's also making it so that it's clear um, what the access feature is. So that's one thing. I'm trying to think of some other examples that we have of being more specific. I'll think about that a little bit more.
We also have a question from Kimberly asking, can you expand a bit more on the differences between universal design and inclusive design?
So universal design, especially a lot of discussions I've had in the library work, focus on universal design for learning. And that is a very specific set of approaches that have to do with that kind of three layer model of different ways of learning. Universal design in general as a design practice has more to do with thinking about creating a product that takes different people's needs in mind, and as many different people's needs in mind. And oftentimes it has what we call affordances, meaning that either it will accept more user error, it can accommodate people in multiple different ways, or again, it has that ability to be adaptable. So inclusive design, I guess one way of looking at it is it takes another step and says, are we asking the right questions? So universal design says if we make it adaptable, then we've got it, but there's always going to be that one way that you miss it. Inclusive design is a little bit more focused on making sure that we've thought about all the right questions, and then also looking at who are we not asking, and how might they approach it differently, and what might they need.
We have one question from Mac asking, what accessibility considerations do you think are often looked over for library instruction?
For library instruction, a lot of what we're seeing now is there are challenges in conveying information for visualizations, for complex concepts, complex images, tables, data, things like that. And I think one of the things is, what can you provide synchronously, meaning, for example, in this presentation, it's live for most people. We're all participating in real time, and it's a single stream of information, versus when we open up to asynchronous participation, people can come in different ways. People can start, stop, move around. And so, for example, one thing is, if you have complex information, having a description of what is there, the assumptions, the conclusions, all of that is easy to provide synchronously. But then if you provide the underlying data, and if the underlying table of data, the underlying list of data is accessible, people can navigate that information asynchronously on their own time and get access to all the same information.
We have a question from Katie asking, do you have any recommendations for resources about going beyond compliance, particularly in physical spaces?
Yeah, physical spaces are definitely not my area of expertise. So I think I think hiring a consultant, paying an expert is one way to go. And if you're in an organization that doesn't have that, partnering with other, so like we partnered with a group of other libraries, and the consultant came and looked at all of our exhibit spaces and provided feedback to all of us, so we can learn not only what we're doing well and what we're not doing well, but we can learn from the other partner institutions. So we learned about things like affordances. So for example, table heights need to be a certain place so that people have forward access to get in and have more closeness to information. And a lot of information we learned about sight lines, for example, how breaks like divisions in the glass and where they line up. They're called are those called bezels? Those interruptions to sight lines can also cause a lot of accessibility barriers. So I think like my first thing is if you are able to hire a consultant, that's a good way. And the user research is another good way. We've learned a lot of things about that we would not have known about our user population without that research.
With the user research, is it through the tiny cafes, or is it like selecting specific participants?
Often the tiny cafes lead to identifying participants that we want to get more information from. And so
Okay.
we learn about things through the tiny cafes, and then we get more expert information through additional engagement.
Gotcha. Robin's asking if we can go back to the slide on patterns of exclusion. I tried to read and listen at the same time and didn't get to finish reading. Robin, we'll also make sure that everybody has a copy of the slides in the follow-up email, but I can head back to that question just so that, or that slide. Some exclusion.
Yes, thank you.
There we go. Problem. And we have a question from Amy asking, how did you determine what spaces would meet a sensory feature, such as natural and warm lighting or quiet spaces? Did you have facilities people identify those spaces, or was it the Disability Services Office or an external consultant? And then did you have requirements for meeting those sensory features?
So in this particular case, a lot of this was kind of self-directed. We did not work with DRO, our Disability Resource Office. I believe the process was, I don't know who did it, but we had someone like a student worker, we had a full-time staff worker use a rubric to go around the building and assess certain characteristics based on some established parameters. Another example of that is we have started looking at where our accessible bathrooms are. So one thing that we learned through engagement with people with access needs was that having a door hook at a seat at a height that's reachable when in the seated position is very helpful. Not just that you can hang a bag on it, but also is an extra way to be able to open and close the door. So when we found out about that, we added to our spreadsheet a column that tracks that information, and in addition to all the other things like which floors have accessible bathrooms, where they're located at. I'm trying to think some of the other things we had tracked. Is there a shelf somewhere in the room? That's another useful accessibility feature.
Yeah, it seems like it's so much more goes into that than just the handicap sign. Were there single stall bathrooms also something that you took into account for like accessibility purposes?
Yeah, and that goes back to being specific. That's a good another example of being like specific about sorry, I was accurate and specific. Yeah. So yeah, one thing is it an accessible stall or is it a single occupant bathroom? And from accessibility needs, one thing we found is that always, but not usually, the single occupancy had the shelf that was available, whereas the ones with the stall, it was just a stall. And so they're having that hook is another important consideration. And is the hook working? Is the hook broken? That's one thing we had to kind of take a look at.
We have a question from Sam asking, what qualifications do you recommend looking for in a consultant? Also, how do you elicit feedback and input from users who have cognitive or communication barriers?
So the first thing I'd recommend, someone with lived experience is always good. And again, disability is not just one thing. So um, I would say a person with lived experience and with a lot of connection to other people with different types of disability is very helpful. Someone who has been working in accessibility a considerable amount of time will also have that same level of perspective. Um, it can be good to hire a consultant that has a focus on what you are specifically wanting to know about. So mobility, if you're looking at mobility, hire someone that knows more about mobility, as opposed to if you're looking at someone for your e-resources and accessibility there, someone that has more experience with sensory and perception would be another thing to think about. So what was the second part of the question?
How do you elicit feedback and input from users who have cognitive or communication barriers?
That is a good question. I'm not usually involved with our user research, so um, I think a lot of what we do is open into questions, and we try to evaluate um, how what are the outcomes that we hope for a resource, what are the expectations that we have for people being able to use it, and finding out how it meets those needs for other people. So a lot of it's kind of like rubric based, and sometimes it can be multiple rounds of like reassessing our expectations for we thought we wanted to get more information on this, but what we really learned is we wanted more information on something that we discovered as part of the engagement process. Are you muted, Devin?
Perfect. We have two questions from Travis. So, how would you address accessibility issues you don't have control over, like a library database being difficult slash impossible to use with a screen reader? And then once you answer that one, I'll share the second question.
Yeah, that one's really tricky. So there are issues with third-party tools, or there are issues with things that for whatever reason we can't change. Part of that has to do with documentation, with assessment. Um, so for example, with our e-resources, um, we when we go back to renew licenses, that is always done in tangent with assessment for the resource, looking, do they have a VPAT? Have they done the work to try assess accessibility? Is it a good VPAT? Is it just garbled nonsense? Um, Sometimes we will engage in further like looking at the resources ourselves with the screen reader with other assistive technologies to make sure that it actually does work. Um, And so sometimes that can be part of the negotiation with the vendors, like, we really love to renew this resource, but we need some assurance from you that you're actually going to address accessibility issues. And then there's also the issue of if something you have more direct control over, how are you going to get the resources to, once that, how are you going to get the resources to remediate the resource and fix it? So one of the things that we're looking at is we've just done what we call the accessibility footprint. Yeah, there's a project we've just started where we basically do an assessment of all of our web resources, get a baseline for this is how many barriers we know about, then identify which ones we want to address, go to the developer for each one, work with them and figure out which ones will have the most impact. And then we have that data that when we do the same scan later, we'll see how much we've affected. Second part of the question?
The second part of the question is, how would you handle instruction on tools that don't accommodate users with disabilities?
That's a really good one. I've looked at some tools that look really fun and really interesting, and they would be good for getting students engaged. But they actually do not work with screen readers. They have other significant challenges and that can be difficult. So I'm, I'm guessing, I don't remember saying equally effective. There's a specific process that we use with internet communication technology called equally effective access something plan, EEAP. And so that's one thing you can do. Is often part of your purchasing process, is you do a scan for accessible products. You determine what is accessible. If you cannot find something that's accessible, and this goes back to that database thing. Some of these resources we want are, there's no competing alternative for it. It's you get this or you get nothing. And so when you find that what you want, what you need is not as accessible as it should be, you can fill out a process to say, okay, we know that this is not ideal, but this is how we're going to accommodate people's needs. And that can often be a lot more work on someone's part, but you want to do it in a way that you're prepared to, print something out, rescan it, OCR it, do whatever you need to do to convert it into useful information. We do a lot of this stuff with course content, so making sure that the testing systems, we're able to put alt text in, but then look at things like oftentimes alt text can only be a certain length. And if you have a longer thing, how are you going to associate additional text with the image? So there are a lot of interesting challenges when it comes to that.
We have a question from Davidson College asking, can you give examples of the types of sensory stimulation objects that are loanable?
That I do not have on hand. While we're looking at other things, I will try to pull up a link to what we have. 1 second.
Are they on the devices page? Yeah, okay. Another thing that I'll do for registrants is share a copy of the chat transcript in the follow-up email, since there are so many great questions that have been asked and links that have been shared, so that you all can take a look at this later in addition to the recording and the slides.
I believe I found it. Let me see if I can get it in the chat here. It is in our wellness and accessibility category. So this has everything from a pen that will basically automatically detect text, so it's almost like OCR, a variety of color correcting lenses, things that help people concentrate. And we've had other discussions about how it's not just about having an artificial cat that you can pet. There are other aspects to wellness that we need to work on and address. So we have a variety of devices, and we're also open to having more discussions about other things we need to do. So we have a variety of programs to provide wellness, crafting opportunities, opportunities to engage, learn something new, just de-stress. And for those activities, being prepared to also provide accommodations and making it as inclusive as possible.